Mr. John, you want to come on up, we'll take item 5, notice ordinance presentation. You want to talk to us about what you had learned?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
I'd like to thank you for letting me come back again and talk about the noise ordinance. Unfortunately, I don't have too much of an update because I haven't made a lot of progress, but I have been working on it pretty hard, and I want to thank Angie and Major Thomason for helping me. He's been very patient in answering a lot of my questions. And in talking to Major Thomason and Lieutenant Harris about how the road deputies feel about the current noise ordinance, they both express their concerns about the method of documenting the noise, and that is currently with the handheld decibel meters. In section 2220, paragraph B, it calls for a minimum of 3 decibel readings at 2-minute intervals. And as you may recall, my main concern is about vehicular noise, mufflers and boom systems and so forth. So if section 22-20B is the minimum standard, there's really no way for the Sheriff's Department to enforce that ordinance. By the time an officer would record the first reading with a vehicle moving at just 40 miles an hour, which would be pretty rare in this parish anyway, by the time he would get a second reading, that car would be over a mile away. So he'd never get a second reading. But I think that's where the parish attorney might be able to help us, because in looking at some of the verbiage of the ordinance, it appears that section 2220 outlines the maximum permissible sound levels. And when I read further in the ordinance, in section 2222, and it's entitled Specific Prohibitions, it says, for example, playing or operating or permitting the playing, use of operation of any radio, musical instruments, phonograph, or other machine or device for the producing or reproducing of sound, if such sound is for the purpose of entertainment, or is used for that purpose, or is used for the purpose of soliciting the sale of merchandise or any tangible goods, or soliciting the vote of any person for a political candidate, and can be heard from the distance of 50 feet or more, whether the source of such sound is located on public or private property. Boy, that was a lot of words. But the main point in there is the 50 feet. Because according to the specific prohibition, if an officer was able to hear that sound at 50 feet, it doesn't appear that he would have to have the decibel meter. And then following in paragraph B of that same 2222, it goes on to say, if said source is located upon any public or private property and can be heard inside a structure or in a motor vehicle other than the source of said noise, and if in the receiving motor vehicle or structure all doors and windows are closed, this would be a specific prohibition. So there again, I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, thank goodness, but I'm not sure how the law specifically is written and what it actually means. I did speak to a gentleman with the New Jersey Environmental Protection Agency, and they are they actually enforce their noise ordinance through the health department, which I thought that was kind of interesting, because the first time I came up, I mentioned that excessive noise is really a health threat. It's a health problem for us. So apparently the state of New Jersey believes that too, since they actually monitor and enforce the law, the noise ordinance, through the health department. The gentleman I was speaking to said that their noise officers can write a citation without the benefit of a decibel meter if they can hear a noise at 50 feet during the daytime, 25 feet at night. Now, to me, that's an overly stringent regulation. But what it does, it enables their noise ordinance officers plenty of latitude to enforce, the very clear infractions. But I'll say again, my concern is vehicular noise. But with the enforcement discretion outlined in 2222, it at least would seem that law enforcement does have some latitude without using the decibel meter. And vehicle noise, exhaust noise is covered separately in paragraph E, but unlike the rules that are outlined in paragraph A and B, those in paragraph F probably wouldn't make it through the court system. And in looking specifically at some of the factors in paragraph F, I won't read all of them, it'll put you to sleep, but whether the nature of the noise is usual or unusual, unreasonable interference with the peaceful enjoyment of property, public or private, and unreasonable interference with the peace and tranquility of neighbor and or neighborhood. So some of the things I've been talking to Major Thomason about is things in the ordinance that's too subjective, and certainly that would be. Because if anyone goes before a judge for a noise violation and the standard is unreasonable interference with the peaceful enjoyment of property, public or private, we could ask everybody in the room here what their standard is for peaceful enjoyment, and we'd probably get 30 different answers. So a judge is going to throw that out immediately. I did have a telephone conversation with Judge Morrison, and although he was very nice, I wasn't really able to determine what he, as a typical judge, would want to have presented in terms of evidence to prevent the case from being thrown out. And I believe it's safe to say that the Sheriff's Department is overloaded with paperwork and the court system is overloaded as well. So clearly the only way the noise laws will ever be enforced is if we make sure the work of the police officer and the court isn't in vain. So in closing, what I would like to ask the Ordinance Committee for is to allow me to work with the parish attorney to kind of sort through the verbiage here and understand a little more about what the intent was. And once we do that, it might very well be that the current ordinance really only needs some clarification and by the parish attorney, and then after that we could just ask the judges for their agreement. I'm finding that it's pretty difficult to talk to a judge in this area. I'm not sure. I've been told that judges are very gun shy about speaking to anyone, because then if a case comes before them and then I step up and say, well, Judge, remember you said such and such. But there has to be some standard that a citizen can have and go into and have access to a judge to be able to ask, because otherwise we can sit here and work our hearts out on it. And if a violation goes before a judge and he says too subjective, it's kind of like if a guy's standing in front of a basketball goal without a hoop on it, and he just keeps throwing the ball up there, and the guy standing beside him says, boy, you almost made it that time. We've got to get to a point where we have some sort of standard to say, this is what it's going to take. And I don't think that would be that hard. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Any comments from the committee?
No, thank you for your hard work. I know it's hard to police that, and then, but I never thought about getting in touch with judges. That's another thing. Of course, it is election year. You might be able to talk to them a little easier right now. So
it's real easy to talk to people that are running. I can get
Okay. Bo, do you have something to say?
No.
Shane was going to say something.
The only thing I was going to say is have we looked into it at all about, the length of exposure? Say, for instance, you're over a certain amount of decimals for a certain amount of time. I heard you mention that you maybe looked into, came in late about the health, in New Jersey. I mean, is there data out there, about if you're at this many decimals for, this much time, it would damage hearing, something to that effect, there is.
On the hearing part, OSHA established that a long time ago.
Okay.
And if you go into any kind of industrial plant, there's going to be signs everywhere that's going to say hearing protection required. As far as the other health benefits, actually in terms of heart disease and things like that, there have been quite a few studies that have proven there are a lot of health problems that are related to noise exposure. And one thing, if there's any business owners or entrepreneurs in here that have businesses, one thing that has been proven is excessive noise hinders productivity. So if you've got employees that are in an area where it's excessively noisy, you're not getting as much bang for your buck when you write that paycheck out. But certainly, you know, and as far as, I thought when you started talking about the exposure and the time, there's, in the ordinance, there's a part of it is kind of a discussion about the frequency and the duration of the noise. I thought you might be going there.
Yeah.
Because from one perspective, if we said, well, the noise was split, I'll give you an example. If your neighbor had a rock band and they cranked up and they were testing their amps for 5 minutes, and it's a very, you know, that's over with. That's a short duration. That's in my mind, I don't care about that.
Right.
There's a short duration as well, though, that when the guy is riding down the street with no mufflers on his car, it's going to only affect me in my house for about 5 seconds. The problem is it affects me for 5 seconds, my neighbor for 5 seconds, and one guy making noise can affect hundreds, if not thousands of people within a 30-minute period. So I think whenever the ordinance talks about duration, I don't think that really has any merit in terms of vehicular noise, because at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you've got a guy with no mufflers and he's woken up, you know, 100 people, one thing Judge Morrison talked about is constitutional rights. Nobody's got to preach to me about constitutional rights. I like living in America. But when 200 people are woken up by one guy, I would say that the constitutional rights of 200 people should outweigh that of one.
I was just looking at, you know, how now we come out and we with a decimal meter and we kind of measure, and I was just wondering if there was, I don't know, maybe the duration did matter, you know. I mean, if it was, like you said, somebody...
He talked about that when he first...
Did he?
Before you got here.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, but I was just wondering, maybe if we could look at that and make it easier to determine whether or not we had a violation or not. You know what I mean? A true violation, you know. Like,
what the sheriff's department would really like is to get away from the meter altogether. What they would really like is a distance. And there's really no reason that a distance couldn't work. For example, if a patrol car was set up on Livingston Road on Highway 63, parked a certain distance, before he parked, he got a reference. There's a speed limit sign, there's a sign for the RV park, and he is 100 feet away, 200 feet away, a quarter of a mile away. And he's sitting in his car, and he can hear a vehicle coming before it gets to that particular point. Doesn't have to take the decibel meter out of the equation altogether. He hears it long before it gets to him, and once we would agree on a certain distance, a reasonable distance, I mean, and it doesn't have to be 25 or 50 feet. At my house on Macklin Road, I can hear vehicles without mufflers on Highway 190. So I can hear them coming down Satsuma Road before they get to Macklin Road. So I'm not worried about these short distances. I'm worried, you know, if I could just get the noise level brought down to where I'm not hearing it from 1/8 of a mile away, I mean, that would be progress. And I really, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. If we can just make baby steps towards, you know, getting the ordinance where it would work, I'd be a happy guy. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people whose sleep is interrupted, they would be happy too. It is getting worse. And I don't know whether, you know, people in this room are in agreement with that, but there's absolutely no, I've been living out here for 37 years, and I can tell you without any doubt whatsoever, it gets worse every year, and for some reason in the last 5 years, it's probably because after, you know, Katrina and the population explosion out here, it's just more people. But simply because we have more people doesn't need to automatically equate to that much noise level rise. Thank you.
So let me ask you a question. So basically, if we could amend the ordinance to eliminate the meter and utilize the distance thing, it would make the sheriff's department's job.
I think the sheriff.
And eliminate a lot of these arbitrary deals that require judgment. If we could say that I could hear it at 75 feet, then it was a violation.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I
Thank
think
you.
that gives us
Appreciate
a
it.
starting point. Shane, you got some information on speed bumps you want to share with us?
No, I worked on that really hard, but I'm not it's not ready.
Okay.
And I didn't get the email to y'all.
And we don't have any new business to discuss, so at this point in time, we entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'll make it.
Got a motion by Mr. Mack, and a second by Mr. Harris. Any objection? The ordinance committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.